what's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Ven Vamos podcast. With us today, we have an incredible guest, somebody that we've shared a lot of space with before, Mr. JC Planas. How are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me here. It's always a pleasure, especially to do something that's political, geared towards millennials and hosted by millennials. Right. I think one of the biggest complaints we get is that millennials are not actively involved in politics as much as they should be. So it's great to see you guys.
100%. Thank you so much. And we'll definitely talk more about the youth and millennials. But before, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background. How did we get here? Are you from Miami?
I am from Miami. I was born here. My parents came from Cuba as teenagers. My dad's a graduate of Miami Edison High, or was. He passed away 3 months ago. But he graduated Miami Edison High. I was born here and raised mostly here. My dad was with Ford Motor Company, so we spent 6 years in Jacksonville, Florida. I got a little bit of Bubba in me. Right. And did a year in Valencia, Venezuela with Ford. So I have.
And when did you go to Venezuela?
In 1982, 82 to 83. It was considered the last glorious year of Venezuela.
Oh, that's what I wanted to know. Like, what are your takes on that?
It's before the first evaluation that really led to the economic downfall. But when I was in Venezuela, it was considered one of the premier countries of the Western Hemisphere. A lot of people don't know this, but Disney and Epcot was supposed to have a Venezuela pavilion. It was in the original plans for Epcot. There was going to be a Venezuela pavilion. That's how prominent Venezuela was in the world in the late 70s, early 80s. And unfortunately, it breaks my heart what is going on there now. I hope that Maduro goes soon.
Right. What are your takes on what Trump has said at FIU? He was recently at FIU on the campus.
If Trump did what he did at FIU all the time and only did that and spent all his time bashing these third world socialist thugs, his poll numbers would be a lot higher than what they are.
If he continued that type of behavior. Okay, cool. So you obviously went to college. Well, where did you go and what did you major in? What did you
I went to Miami-Dade first for 2.5 years and then went to Florida State solely because that's where the state capital was. And I was in political science,
like political environment,
and history. Yeah, I interned in the House of Representatives. I started off as an intern for Bruce Hoffman, who was the state representative for this area back in the early '90s. And I was Bruce's intern, and then worked for State Senator Roberto Casas from Hialeah. And then finally, I was legislative aide to Carlos Valdez my last year in Tallahassee.
And what does a legislative aide do for some of the people that don't know what these positions are?
Basically, we are the eyes and ears of the representative. We file their bills, make sure their amendments get filed on time, set up their appointments. Sometimes we even have to go to committees to represent them on bills that they have filed. Right. So you are a state representative only has one aide in Tallahassee during session. So it's,
which we're in right now.
They do everything. Yes, we're in legislative session now.
Cool. And when you were that age, did you think that you were always going to be doing that? When did you know that I wanted to work in politics?
I knew I always wanted to be involved in politics. It's when I was 8 years old and we lived in Jacksonville. The mayor of Jacksonville, Hans Tanzler, ran for governor, and my father was on his campaign staff.
Okay, so you were always involved kind of.
We traveled all around the state campaigning for Hans Tanzler. And at 8 years old, that experience with the campaign was just amazing, and it instilled a love of politics for me. Right. I remember Ronald Reagan accepting the nomination of the Republican Party on my 10th birthday, the day I turned 10 years old, July 17th, 1980. Watching that, being enthralled. That was the first convention I watched. And
you were actually there with the...
No, I wasn't there. I watched it on TV.
Okay.
I've only been to one convention, and I can tell you...
How are those like? Because I've never been to one. Most of our people that watch this don't...
I can tell you... People find this counterintuitive. A political convention is much better on television than
it is in there. But it's really tense. So, at least from my take, whenever we go to like a Lincoln Day dinner or something like that, they're so tense. It's like everybody's
I went to the Minnesota convention because I was the head of the Republican lawyer team for McCain in 1998 here. So I went to that convention, and it was fun. It was a great experience, but there's a lot that's going on that the television coverage provides that if you're there on the floor or in the rafters, you really don't see.
Right. And so out of all the things that you've done today, so we're going to go through them, but what's something that is still on your list of things that you want to continue to do or something new that you might not be focusing your time on now?
Listen,
a hobby or like a...
when I was part of the reason I ran for office to begin with was I had been a prosecutor in the juvenile court system, and I saw a lot of the problems with the juvenile system. And I ran for office, and I did a lot of things during my time there.
So cases that pertain to minors.
Yes.
Okay.
And these were kids, not just that were getting arrested, but that were getting arrested and perhaps had issues in other courts. And we saw that there wasn't a continuum of care for these kids. So I did a lot
in between the
other courts. We tried to spearhead a unified family court.
So like somebody got take. I mean, again, I'm trying to go to law school, but I don't know how the system works yet. A lot of people also don't know. So let's say they had like a criminal charge. Okay, with them that goes in a criminal court, but because they're a minor and now gets taken into another court.
It's a criminal juvenile court.
Okay.
So juvenile court has two sides. It has the delinquency side, which is the criminal side, and then it has the dependency side. And these are kids that the state has filed an action to perhaps take the kids away from the parents, or the parents have shown that they are unfit, or are foster kids who were given up by their parents and are still in the system because they haven't been adopted yet. Any sort of governance over that system goes into the dependency side.
Understood.
So originally we used to have kids whose parents had left. These kids were on their own. They were foster kids, and then they got arrested, and they were in the delinquency system that way. But recently we see kids who are under 18. They get arrested. They're in the delinquency system, but then they have kids of their own. So it's their babies are
also
in
in
the
that
dependency system,
too.
and that's extremely sad. So you ask, one of the things I want to do still is I'm looking into getting involved with the guardian ad litem and the attorney ad litem program, so I can go and help represent and stand up for the rights of some of these kids in the system.
Wow, that's awesome. And that's what your work is based on. So is that a main reason why you decided to run for office as well?
After law school, after I was a legislative aide, I came back and I worked for Alex Pinellas, who was a county commissioner then. He later became our first executive mayor. And I worked for Alex Pinellas for 2 years, decided to go to law school, went to St. Thomas, ended up getting a job right after graduation with the state attorney's office. I thought I was going to run for office right after graduation.
So then why go to law school?
And decided not to. No, I went to law school because I knew I wanted the degree. I knew I wanted the training. And I thought I'd go to law school maybe just to get into politics. I didn't think I'd enjoy the practice. And I enjoyed my trial class so much that I decided not to run for office right away. And I went to the state attorney. And I did 3 years there, but that issue with juvenile court stuck in me, and I knew I would run it sometime. I ended up running in 2002 because we had an opportunity to have a Speaker of the House from Dade County, and now it's normal. We now have Jose Oliva from Miami-Dade County who's the Speaker of the House, and 10 years ago we had Marco Rubio. But in 2002, we hadn't had a Speaker of the House since Dick Pettigrew in the 60s, and we had never had a Cuban-American Speaker of the House. And Gaston Cantens was running to be Speaker of the House. He had been a prosecutor like me. He had been a state rep already for 4 years. And I ran against the one guy from Miami-Dade County who was not backing Gaston Cantens to be Speaker. And I thought that it was appalling, the fact that we had somebody from Miami-Dade who could be the top spot, and somebody from here wouldn't be backing him. So I ran against that guy, and I beat him in the primary. And then from there, I did my 8 years. He sued when I won the election, so I learned a lot about election law then. And then I had a litigious election in 2006.
Do you think that your education, like when you studied law, did you focus on election law at that point?
No, they didn't even have it as a class.
That's what I'm saying, because most people don't say I'm an elections lawyer. Most people don't say or practice that. So how did that come to be?
Well, my opponent sued when I beat him, and I learned a lot. I was represented by an excellent attorney named Michael Teen, learned a lot. And then in 2006, they tried to come after me. And first they filed this doctor who didn't really want to campaign, so they needed someone else. They filed this woman who was a member of a community council, which is the elected zoning board for unincorporated areas. And they realized that with the doctor still there and this woman, they weren't going to beat me. So they go and they recruit a distant cousin of mine who had a bone to pick with my father for some reason or another, but they get my second cousin in the race with a similar name to mine.
Oh my God, so it's just to take away from you.
We sued, to kick him off the ballot, and we sued to kick the community council member off the ballot because she had not resigned. So we developed a strategy, and I hired a lawyer who ended up being a mentor to me, a lawyer by the name of, oh my God.
But it sounds like you have a hater. Like, it sounds like you've always had just like a thorn in.
I ran against an incumbent, and the incumbents normally, when they lose, they
Is
want
this
to
a
go
normal
after.
practice in politics where these kind of tactics are used?
No, Miami-Dade has always been, there's always been some bad actors.
It's always been controversial in Dade, to be specific.
Yes.
Okay.
So Ron Meyer, who's the attorney from Tallahassee, represented me, and I learned a lot from him. And when I got termed out of the legislature, other people started calling me. Hey, listen, I have an elections issue. Can you help me? And
Right, because
within
of the
3
experience you
years,
had.
I had an election practice.
Just because of how many people were also going through another,
Yes.
not similar circumstance, but were in the same kind of.
I think another issue is you also saw a lot of the regulatory agencies getting more involved. First,
regulatory agencies, people might not know what that is. So it's like an
the
organization.
Florida Ethics Commission, the Florida
Group of people
the Florida
who
Elections
oversee.
Commission. Yes, and what had happened is we had toughened the lobbyist laws, and right after I left, they changed the structure for political committees to try to prevent people from using what was then known as committees of continuous existence as slush funds. They were using those committees
Continuous
to
existence
go out to
means
dinner,
like
to
regardless
travel.
of time, they.
So they changed the political committee laws. They ended up being tougher on financial disclosure statements. And I always like to say, if you pulled my financial disclosure forms from my 8 years in the legislature, they were all wrong. They are all done improperly. I am lucky
According
I
to the
never
law.
got a complaint. And it's one of those things, there's an old saying, you teach best what you most need to learn. And, I started looking at the disclosure laws, the ethics laws, and, I realized what it is that people can do. So a lot of what I do is advise candidates on how to properly do financial disclosure forms, how to properly fill out their forms so they don't have
And
issues.
just move the right way, because at the end of the day, there's so much more scrutiny in trying to become an elected official versus other things.
And rightfully so. I mean, this is something that, this is a public trust. And one of the things I've advised local elected officials on is how to comply with the Sunshine Law, how to make sure that you're not speaking to your colleagues unlawfully behind the scenes, how to make sure that you're keeping up with, openness laws, with the true nature of the Sunshine Law, which was created by Ruben
Can you tell us
Askew.
about that Sunshine Law? Is that what does that do, or what is it?
Listen, so what happened is in the 70s, we have a lot of scandals involving the legislature, and Governor Ruben Askew comes in and says, we're going to fix this. The Sunshine Law is 2 parts. Number one, the financial disclosure side.
So letting people know what you're spending money on.
Well, no, what your financial interests are, because if you're voting on things that could be a conflict of interest, the public has a right to know.
Could you give us an example of maybe?
Sure. Let me give you a local elected official. Let's say that person has all of his money in Wells Fargo.
Okay.
And Wells Fargo wants to open a new branch in his neighborhood. That's a potential conflict of interest because they
Shares of
keep
his
his money,
money.
and they want to open a branch and has to be zoned. Let's say that somebody owns a great deal of Apple stock, and the public school system is about to do a technology investment, and they're deciding whether to go the PC route or the Apple route.
So they're obviously an Apple,
Exactly.
and then his own.
And this is why these financial disclosures are so important, because it shows what conflicts of interest could be. So I work with members on that. The other issue is members have to keep up with public records laws. Nowadays, when the Sunshine Law was written, nobody had a cell phone.
In the 70s.
And then when the cell phones, there were bricks.
Yeah, you could just pull this information out anywhere.
These laws were written during a time where the concept of text and voice messages and
Didn't
private
exist.
email servers, email didn't even exist.
Right.
So it was very easy to keep up with, public records requests in the beginning. Have you had contact from such a person? Oh, these are the letters they wrote.
Yeah, exactly.
The first email servers, especially for government officials, were government email servers. I remember when I was a legislative aide back in the early 90s, you had the legislative government email, but no member had a private email. You didn't have Gmail yet.
It was
You
just like a
didn't
communal
have-
thing that everybody used?
I'm
or-
sorry?
So you had your own.
I had a government email system. So if there was a public records request, it was only the government server. So
Which is
now,
all in-house.
yes. So now in the age of smartphones, politicians have private emails. They have their own cell phone text messages. And when there's a public records request, a lot of public officials don't realize, even though it's your phone, even though it's your private email, even if it's your Gmail, Hotmail, whatever account,
Right.
or @me account if you're a Mac user, if you do anything that involves your government position on that, that's discoverable
And
in
that's
a
liable.
public records
So you're
request.
liable for that.
Well, they have to give it up.
Exactly.
And part of the problem that we're seeing is
So anything's fair game. Any communication that
it
you
has
can
to
you
be.
do.
But that's the nature
That's the point,
of
that it
openness.
has to be.
So we see a lot of administrators, a lot of municipal attorneys that don't know how to rein in their elected officials. And the ones that I advise, and I'll give you an example. I was private counsel to Philip Levine when he was candidate and then mayor of Miami Beach. And, I was always on his butt. I'm like, if you get a request for this, if you text with your private email, that's public. You need to turn that over immediately.
Wow.
And I work with my clients to make sure that I tell people, if you want to be 100% above board, if you want someone to keep you 100% transparent so you never get in trouble, hire me and I will keep you that way. If you're looking for a lawyer who wants to hide things, I'm not your guy. There's other great attorneys.
So
here.
just the public versus private just relationship that elected officials have versus other people is just completely different.
Listen, one of the things I noticed, and people ask me, will I ever run for office again? I don't know if I ever will. I certainly did not like giving up my privacy. But when you run for office, you're giving up your privacy, and rightfully so, because if you're going to be responsible for so many things, we need you to be as transparent as possible.
On all different aspects of your
On
life.
everything.
So what happens to the people that say that personal doesn't matter in professional?
It's first of all, the Supreme Court has said that personal emails on your work server are non-discoverable. But
Personal emails on your work
server.
So if I email my mom from my job, that's a no-go? I'm just trying to...
Yes, they don't have a right to get those.
Okay.
But there is a scrutiny placed. You have a burden to show that these are personal. And,
So you still have to turn them over and be like,
yes.
look, this is personal.
I mean, listen,
Okay.
I think the biggest crime that Hillary Clinton committed had to do with the fact that she wiped emails off without the scrutiny, without verification.
Like willingly knowing that.
She was saying, oh, no, these were my yoga classes, this was this.
But we don't know.
We don't know. You have to, there has to be a filter to do that. And I say this critical of Hillary, with the knowledge that very publicly I am anti-Trump. I just think that we have to hold everybody
Accountable regardless of party affiliation or...
Absolutely. And just because Hillary committed crimes doesn't mean that the country should have taken that bad step on going to someone like Trump, who I think is dangerous. But
Okay. So when you were in office, what election laws were then now to what are ones now that are changed? Or has anything changed since the time?
When I got my first election in 2002, early voting was just starting. And
So prior to that, early voting, it's just you could only vote on election
early
day?
voting did not exist prior to 2002.
In Florida?
It was either election day, or they called it, still back then they called it absentee ballot. Now it's called vote by mail ballot.
Right, okay.
Now, in the 70s, absentee ballot meant you had to have a legitimate excuse. You have to, cough up a lung, get a note from a doctor,
or like a work or something.
to vote by absentee ballot. In the 80s, the rules are relaxed to the point that anybody who feels that they're not going to be able to make election day can ask for an absentee ballot. I remember in college, knowing that I would be in Tallahassee, I got an absentee ballot in the 88 election, filled it out before I went back to school, and I was
that's how you
able
voted.
to make sure I voted. So early voting comes in 2002, but in the 2002 election, it's hardly anybody attends it. In 2004, I got involved with the Republican legal team in George W. Bush's reelection, and early voting out of nowhere just explodes. And
Everybody
we
just goes
I remember we had to bring in folks from Texas to fly in to help out because it was an unruly mess in areas like Lemon City. We had Democratic activists. So in 2004, George W. Bush, because of Jeb, built up a great deal of cordiality and a good relationship with Haitian Americans here in Miami-Dade County.
Okay.
So we had a lot of Haitian Americans who were going in 2004 to vote for George W. Bush's reelection.
Right.
And we saw Democratic Party activists sending people to start threatening and intimidating folks at early voting.
Isn't that like voter suppression? Couldn't those people be like? Is that
they were doing the sign of the Haitian necklace, which is the tire with the gasoline flaming around their necks. They were trying to intimidate voters to not vote for John, not vote for George W. Bush, to vote for Kerry. So we had to marshal in people from Texas to help protect that. The legislature addressed the problem. We made sure that there was 100 feet that you couldn't approach voters. We tightened the laws there.
Early vote, they had that rule where you can't stand within this
within 100 feet. So then we also made sure
that wasn't a thing back then.
I'm sorry?
Like that rule of 100 feet wasn't there back then?
It was not as enforced as it is now.
Okay.
The other issue was we had different hours for early voting in all different counties, and we were seeing way different standards. So we tightened the law to make sure that early voting can only be within those 2 weeks, within a 12-hour period, that they can't be extended till 9 or anything like that. After I left the legislature briefly curtailed early voting to 9 days, which I thought was a giant mistake. And
so shortening from 2 weeks to just like a week and a half.
Yes, and there was thoughts that Republicans had done it because early voting was something for Democrats. And one of the things,
disagree. I think early voting is for anybody.
This is the issue. And one of my big disagreements with the early voting law is where we have early voting. Early voting right now is only allowed in libraries, city halls, or government-owned buildings.
And schools, maybe? Or
yes, but they don't.
Because FIU recently, like last...
Yes, they don't do early voting in schools because of the fact that, for the most part, a school cannot use... They can't give away a hall for 2 weeks. We have election day at schools, and the schools do a teacher work day because the schools can accommodate 1 day, but we don't really have early voting in schools.
I understand what you're saying.
If we allowed, early voting to be held in vacant commercial space, vacant shopping mall space.
Would that be a conflict of interest?
No, it would not. The government rents the area out, holds early voting there, and
with their own
shopping
staff,
malls
their own
and
resources.
banquet halls. All those areas can accommodate you rent it out for 2 weeks. The problem is it's expensive.
It is.
But as a society, we still spend. Even if everybody talks about campaign finance. Even if you look at all the money that the government spends on election and all the private money, all the campaign contributions that come in, all that money as a country is still less than what the country spends on Halloween. So it is.
So it's such a minuscule pool of actual funds.
We still spend less on elections than we do on Halloween. Forget about Christmas. So the truth is that money, as a conservative, as a Republican, I don't believe that money can fix every problem. But elections are one of those problems that money can fix. I do think
because of the people who can be voted into office.
So I think we should have some more types of early voting places. So suburban Republicans can go and early vote, and it can be easier for them. I think that would be a great idea. I think that
there's a lot of topics that are touched upon that I've been writing, so I don't mean to seem rude, but man, I've never thought about it like that. And so, for example, as somebody who's gone to early voting as like the campaigner, what I've seen is that there's a lot of ways that there could be voter suppression. But does that happen nowadays? I'm trying to say like I've only been doing it since 2016.
In Little Haiti, we have an issue that concerned us. There are Haitian Americans who still have a hard time reading and writing even in Creole, and they get voter assistance. And anybody who has a hard time should be allowed voter assistance. But one of the things
Or
we
is somebody
found,
taking you?
you take someone in, they
But what if
sign a
it's
form.
okay, hold up now. What if it's the same campaign? Like, what if it's like
That's the issue. We saw.
and all they're firefighters?
We saw one guy. We saw one. Well, the voter assistance law bars anybody, your employer and a union person, from being the voter assistant.
Well, I'll tell you, I witnessed firsthand that occurring. Okay, to a voting site, but we could talk about that also. But could you keep explaining that?
So basically, what we found is one guy goes in with a voter, takes him in to vote, and then leaves and comes back with another voter and takes them in to
literally
vote.
like cycling it, like running game on
and
it.
that's something that I think we need to look at. Voter assistance is protected by the Voting Rights Act at the federal level, so it is very hard to do a change to something that's federally protected without the Justice Department doing an investigation.
Mm-hmm.
I still think we need to look at voter assistance and make sure it is not abused. We have to have a system where anybody who requires the assistance can get it. But
should that be by like a third party? Should that be like allocated government resource?
I think,
or can it be like, you know what I mean?
I think we should stop people from assisting more than 10 people. So, if
I swear you're saying like it's like a numbers.
exactly, I
'Cause
mean,
I'm
nobody should
telling you,
assist more than 10 people.
There
That's it.
was a group of firefighters that were taking voters from Joe Carollo's campaign into the voting precinct. I firsthand because I don't know if you know where Flagler and 14th is. Due to the construction, it was like almost impossible to park or even voters to get there, right? But that was a early voting site. And then obviously on voting day, I was like, out of the many
I
sites.
remember, and they were buzzing. A campaign is allowed to bus people in.
That's what I'm trying to understand. Like,
Okay?
what's the
a campaign is allowed to bus people in. There's a difference between doing the grassroots and calling people up. Hey, can I do transportation? For Leanna Ross Layton's first election in '89, I picked up people and drove them.
That's
to
a very
the
good
polls.
tactic. Not
You're
to say
allowed
that.
to do that. Another thing is to go in with them to the voting booth
And then
say,
be like,
"Vote
circle this."
and Exactly.
Understood.
That's the fear. That's the issue that we have to make
And
sure.
they can go in because somebody's like, oh, I can't write, so I need somebody to fill it in
Now,
for me.
mind you, we still see that. I am sure that my big fear is vote theft in nursing homes. I did a
Or
case.
like ALS, like assisted living facilities.
I did a case where I did an investigation of fraud in a North Miami-based district. My client was a Haitian American, John Patrick Julian, may he rest in peace. He passed away a year after, but the election was stolen from him because his opponent got a campaign consultant that would put her mother in 3 different nursing homes, and the woman would go in and steal the votes from the old people. Go in, here, please
But
sign here.
actually, like going in and filling,
She'd fill out the ballots, have them
fill
sign
that.
it. One of the things that we have to spend, and this is a good way to stop fraud, but it's expensive, we have to have mandatory supervised mail voting in nursing homes. Anybody who does...
So any mail that comes from this type of facility...
Any person who requests a ballot by mail, who lives in an ALF, a nursing home, or residential housing,
Right.
the elections, they can request right now
Just handpick
supervised
them out.
voting. So if, let's say you run a nursing home, you have 200 registered voters in your nursing home.
supervised.
You are allowed to call the supervisor of elections and say, we have 200 people here who have requested absentee ballots. Rather than mailing them to us, come with the ballots, set up the privacy booths, and have them vote on
and
a
let them do
special
it.
day.
And if they need assistance, you can help them out.
And right now, the elections department provides that assistance as requested by the place. We should make this mandatory.
Like across
any
the board.
nursing home, any ALF, any type of residential housing should have mandatory supervised vote by mail. So if your residents are voting and they can't leave that building because they have physical
I've been
issues.
to those senior centers. You can get away with a lot of things with the group of the abuelitas.
Have that be supervised by the elections department. That should be something that the state spends money on. That is a guaranteed fraud prevention. Listen, we have fraud in vote by mail voting, but 90% of the fraud is in these centers. It is in senior centers, retirement homes.
And they carry a lot of weight, especially just for the volume of people.
Fraud. There's virtually no fraud in door-to-door absentee mail because nobody. The fraud is all money-based. Somebody gets hired. We see the majority of the fraud that we see is actually in nonpartisan races and in the party primaries, we rarely see that much vote by
Like in
mail
the
fraud
runoffs or like
in
in
the
like the
general
decisive
election
races, yeah.
because they're that aware. Most of these people are aware enough that they're not going to let someone take their vote for president or governor in a partisan race. In a primary where the candidates are very much similar, or in a
there's more
nonpartisan race
competition.
where they don't care, they sell the people sell their vote. The biggest problem we have with voter fraud is compliance by the voter. They're complicit in letting someone steal their vote.
Yeah, but most people don't even know what voter laws are. Most people don't even know what the
but
real laws are. So.
Most voter fraud is done because the voter let themselves be
occurred.
defrauded. Yes.
Let it occur.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So in more particulars, out of all the election law you do, do you focalize in specialize in one aspect or all aspects of election law?
All election law is so narrow that it's all aspects, and there's different things every year. I mean, recounts were big this year. I actually got sent to Tampa. I got hired to go to Tampa for a recount. There are limited things, but it's sort of a little bit of everything. Most of what I do is compliance. I tell clients it's easier to hire me now than hire me after
later.
when it's
Wow, I like that.
But it's true. I keep them honest. During the election, I do vote protection for candidates. We sign up poll watchers, and we go in and we watch the process to make sure it's not abused.
Out of all aspects of election law, what do you think is the part that gets most abused in elections? Or like what part would you say like this is what needs the most fixing?
I think, again, the voter assistance in early voting, although poll watchers in the centers have helped a lot, I think the residential housing with the absentee ballots is still a problem. One of the issues we had, the legislature is taking a big step in fixing it, which is people whose signature has changed. And this is not an abuse, it's just an unfortunate thing. Their signature has changed. So the canvassing boards, which have to approve or reject every vote by mail ballot, they're not trained in signature recognition. They're not trained in handwriting analysis. So they reject sometimes ballots of people who it's legitimate, but they reject it as illegitimate. One of the issues is Miami-Dade has always done it best. The Miami-Dade Canvassing Board has always erred on the side of making sure that the vote is counted. And in fact, Miami-Dade has fewer bad rejections than other counties. There's other
counties. When you say rejections, you mean like somebody turned in a ballot and it's like no good? Or
let's say an elderly person, since the last election has developed the shakes in a hand.
Right.
So all of a sudden they start shaking their signature, and it doesn't exactly match
what was on file.
When it was on file. Number one, Miami-Dade, they look at what the printing of when Miami-Dade gets a ballot and it gets rejected, Miami-Dade looks at their past signatures and looks at their voter registration application,
like when they actually
their
filled it
handwriting
out.
and printing, and basically will analyze. And even though they are not trained, they basically try to see if they can match letters, and they err on the side of accepting the ballot. Other counties, and I've personally witnessed Palm Beach County, Susan Booker, who is the supervisor, and she was rightfully suspended by Governor DeSantis. Susan Booker would reject ballots without the canvassing board looking, would reject ballots.
Just freely, no, this one doesn't work. This one doesn't work.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's one of the issues. I saw a campaign that lost by 16 votes.
So I could really
because they
completely
rejected ballots. And that was a big problem. I represented a Haitian American candidate, and for the words "sign here" and "print your name" are the same in Creole. So we had Creole, we had Haitians in Palm Beach who were printing their names as the signature
instead of signing them,
and they were being rejected
because they didn't sign.
Had that ballot been before the Miami-Dade Canvassing Board, they would have looked at the printing on the voter application, and those ballots likely would have been accepted.
Wow. So it really does depend on who is the person
We need uniform
managing
standards. There's been too much variance in the signature identification.
across different counties within the
Yes.
state of Florida?
Yeah, across different counties in the state of Florida. We need more of a uniform system. Yes.
And so I remember in like law class that I took that like a law needs to be clear and concise, right? It can't be subject to change, because if it changes too much, then people are like, "What's going on?" But also like who enforces it?
Well,
like so who's responsible to enforce?
This is part of the reason that the federal court, well, they didn't fully, but they went almost all the way to invalidate Florida's signature recognition law. The federal court, in the case that Bill Nelson filed, basically stated that Florida has no consistent standards, has no proper standards on signature. It's left to the discretion of each of the different canvassing boards. And for that reason, the law has to be changed. And my position is, if the rest of the counties would operate the way Miami-Dade County does, then
the problem
things
would
would be a lot better. We have the best supervisor of elections in the state. Craig Latimer, who's the supervisor in Tampa, comes close, but Christina White really is the rock star of supervisors in the state of Florida.
Do you think with all the different like I guess like legal controversies that come up in the news, do you think that election law gets overlooked, or do you think it actually gets a lot more exposure?
I think everything gets ignored in the news. I think because of the changing nature of media.
Like this one right here, we're doing a podcast.
Exactly, and hopefully people watch it. But I think that the major or old traditional medias, the three networks, the local stations, don't have enough time to cover something like election law. I think other than PBS, you really don't get in-depth coverage on the nightly news. I think part of this is the fault of the broadcasters. I think part of this is the fault of the viewers. The viewers aren't exactly demanding more in-depth coverage. They want, the
sexiness.
I had a very, very dear friend who worked in the TV news business, and she always used to say, if it bleeds, it leads. That's what they're looking for.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, so if there was blood, it leads on the news.
Okay, but more is like what we're trying to do, right, is just cultivate political activism. Not necessarily like you have to go out and protest every day, but like you should at least vote. So where do you think this like?
I think it goes
where did it come from?
It goes beyond. Listen, I've been married 3 times.
Okay.
And I have now been married twice as long as the first 2 times combined.
Understood.
I say this, my second wife is actually a dear, dear friend of mine. And people ask, what's the difference? I'm like, well, the difference is me. I was a little kid and a dumbass the first 2 times, and now I'm mature. Marriage works when you have communication, when you have understanding. If you go home and if you're married, you go home, you listen to your spouse, you exchange ideas with your spouse, you talk to your spouse, you have a dialogue. If you go home and you ignore your spouse, okay, your marriage will end. If you talk to your spouse and you communicate with your spouse, your marriage survives. Democracy is the same way. You can't just go and vote every 2 years or every 4 years.
And just give up. You have to
cultivate it. You have to have exchange of ideas. If I don't ask my wife how her day was, if I don't tell my wife how my day was, she gets upset at me, okay? If my wife doesn't listen to me when I have one of my stupid ideas, I get upset at her. So marriage is about listening. Democracy is the same way. Right. This thought that we are only going to listen to people who agree with us and we are only going to talk to people who agree with us will cause the end of our democracy. We need to be in constant communication with folks that disagree with us. The Democratic Party, Tom Perez, the leader of the Democratic Party, did one of the dumbest things I have ever seen. Yesterday he announced that Fox News will not be allowed to moderate a Democratic Party debate. Well, Fox News, yes, has gone totally pro-Trump. But that's the reason why it should be. Because what good are you, if you're going to be the Democratic candidate for president, if you cannot convey a message to the other side to say that you are still going to be president of all America, then you have no chance of winning the election.
It's just so polarized, and that's what I think.
And this is just the moronic nature of where both sides have gone. When I was growing up, okay, not only the president, but the congressional leader from the other party always spoke to all of America. When
you address them, it's a
Ronald
country,
Reagan
it's
became
not-
president, he didn't speak just to the Republicans. He spoke to all of America. Tip O'Neill didn't just speak to the Democrats. He spoke to all of America. When Bill Clinton became president, he didn't speak just to the Democrats. He spoke to all of America. 2 years after Bill Clinton gets elected, the leadership in the Congress changes. When Newt Gingrich becomes Speaker of the House, he didn't just speak to Republicans, he spoke to all of America. And that's why the combination of Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich worked, because the combination of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill worked, because they spoke to each other. We have given that up. And it's not just a fact that the legislative leaders aren't speaking to each other, they don't even want to speak to the voters on the other side. And I think that is a giant mistake that can lead to just catastrophic consequences in this country.
So do you think that is now becoming the norm, and do you think that's where we're headed?
Yes.
Or because I'm almost seeing it as like we're polarized by the issue and we stick to our ideas.
I'll give you an example. So Joe Biden, who is an extremely decent, good person, and I'll probably be vilified by Republicans for saying this, but Joe Biden went and said Mike Pence is a decent guy. Now, I've spoken to Lincoln Diaz-Balart, who served in the Congress with Mike Pence, and Lincoln Diaz-Balart has pretty much said, yeah, actually, Mike Pence is a really good, decent guy.
Yeah.
So the thought that someone like Joe Biden would acknowledge that as well is not surprising, but Joe Biden got vilified.
Like, how could you even say that about this
Democrats.
guy?
Exactly. And
this is not our team. What are you doing?
That is a huge problem. And you see Republicans the same way. A Republican talks well about Joe Biden, and they're going to get vilified. And I think that's a
But who
major
does the
problem.
vilifying? Is it kind of like a metaphysical like thing that the media kind of does, or is it like a person?
No, it goes viral. Listen. So I am a firm believer that the success of Israel is important to the success of America.
Right.
Because Israel acts the way America acts in their center of the world. And they are the most democratic country in all of the Middle East. And if you are attacking Israel, you can't fully be
another democratic country.
You can't be pro-America if you're anti-Israel. So, this Representative Omar has been, first she attacked AIPAC, which is the bipartisan pro-Israel lobby committee in the United States.
Comprised of both Democrats and Republicans.
And absolutely, almost equally. And Democrats and Republicans both go to AIPAC and are both welcomed warmly because Israel is our friend. Israel is almost as close to us as the United Kingdom. It almost rises to that special relationship. Now, Congresswoman Omar criticized AIPAC and then criticized Israel to the point that she almost sounded anti-Semitic. Just like the Republicans removed Steve King from committees, rightfully so, because he did something that was racist.
The Democrats should do the same.
The Democrats should punish Representative Omar. However, now they're backing off because they're afraid of their base.
Do you think the Democrats have gone a little too far left?
I think both parties have gone way too far. The Republicans, this is John F. Kennedy, Bill Clinton would no longer, Jimmy Carter wouldn't even get nominated by this Democratic Party. By the same token, Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush would not get nominated by this Republican Party. I think this is a complete shame, the way these parties have turned to the point that what should be their standard bearers would no longer have a chance in their nominating process. I think is horrible for the country and bad for the parties. I think the parties could end up being destroyed within themselves.
Do you think that could just be us moving forward? Like as time goes on, identities change, people change, we change. Could that just be what people really are? Like we elect representatives to represent the collective. Could we just be that? Or
I think that the way the media has portrayed the issues has forced people into their respective camps. And
Like you're either this or that.
Presidential candidates used to speak in broad strokes, and they campaigned very
To try and
broadly.
get everybody with it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then this thought that, and technology, I guess this is one of the things that technology has actually made things worse. You can identify your supporters now in a way that you've never been able to do.
Oh, 100%. We use this thing called WebElect.
Exactly.
Listen to me. WebElect, if you're listening, sponsor us because we love you.
Yes,
Okay?
yes. Dr. Homan's son, I forget your first name, but I served with your dad in the legislature. WebElect is awesome. He's the guy who created it.
That's all I've used. And
It is, but
the micro-targeting of it is what's ridiculous.
But there's a danger in national politics micro-targeting because it creates a disincentive for those in the center. And for those of us who are angry centrists who see, I don't like the president. I don't like the president's movement. I don't like the tariffs. I don't like the wall. I don't like a lot of his rhetoric. I like the deregulation. I love his Supreme Court justice picks.
Right.
I love the judicial picks. And I love part of the tax cut.
One thing I really love is when he said that we want to increase $500 million to pediatric cancer.
Yeah.
So that's something
I think there are good things. But again, the deficit and the debt keeps ballooning. He is spending a lot. There are a lot of things, and then just the rhetoric and the fact that this is a president that David Duke goes on television and says that he loves. Man, I'm sorry. I want a president to go to a podium the next day and say, I don't want David Duke's support. He can stay on his own. And this president doesn't do that, and it upsets me tremendously to the point that I can't support him. By the same token, the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party seems to be taking over. And I find Bernie Sanders as disgusting as Trump.
$2.5 million in like the first day of him announcing, which I think, I mean, not the ideologies, but like that's pretty impressive. I think. Would you say he's the front runner in the Democratic?
I doubt it. Just because you can crowdsource fundraising doesn't. In a national campaign, $2 million is a drop in a bucket. The other thing is we're seeing for the first time. You've seen increases in campaign spending for many years, and I think for the first time we are seeing a sharp decrease.
Is it going?
In what it
you wouldn't
takes
say it's
to
going to
win.
get more expensive because that's what I'd say.
They're getting
just from-
cheaper. Campaigns at the national level are getting cheaper.
Well, we make it cheaper. I'm being honest.
What is the most traditionally? Even if you read the case of Buckley versus Vallejo, that basically said you can donate to your own campaign as much as you want.
I use your own private money.
One of the things that Buckley said is, it's freedom of speech because you need money for TV ads, and that's how you express yourself. Well, TV ads is the one dying thing in campaigns. People aren't watching TV anymore. Your generation isn't watching traditional TV anymore. Web ads, internet ads have taken the place of that. Social media has exploded. So social media, for the most part, is free. Even the paid social media is not that expensive.
Compared to other means.
Google ads and web ads are a little bit more expensive than social media ads because you're targeting, but nowhere near in the realm of TV. So I liken TV is you never know if they're going to watch. You never know if they're skipping over commercials. I like the web ads because it's made things cheaper. Our new media platform has created a way for any candidate without as much money as the other to still get their message out. The one area of spending where I think it most works is in grassroots. I think especially at the local level, if you can get more people that are committed to be going out there door to door, I think that still helps. I think door to door is still the best thing ever.
Yeah, we definitely agree. We wish we could talk more about it, but honestly, right now we've run out of footage time. JC, thank you so much for being on with us today. Hopefully you could come on later on and talk about, hopefully, we would love your opinions in 2020, especially where these things could go and if any other cases come like that. Are there any shout outs you'd like to give to anybody?
No, listen, just thank you for having me here. And, I hope that you guys stay involved. I mean, if you're watching this podcast, if you're watching or listening to this podcast, the chances are that you are already politically active. Yeah. Think about your opinions. Like I tell my students, I don't care if your opinion is contrary to me, if it's left, it's right. The only thing I require of my students is that they have opinions.
Then have one. All right. JC, thank you so much for coming on with us.
Thank you.
Hey, you just sat through the whole podcast. If you like what you heard, make sure to subscribe and comment what your favorite part was. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Ven Vamos. If you're listening to this on the audio version, give us a 5-star rating. Thank you and have a great day.